Yin Kong stood blankly below God, her eyes unfocused. It wasn't her genetic constraint being unlocked, but a true listless silence. She seemed to be at a loss. Yes. She was truly at a loss. It was partially because they had gained so much points in the previous movie. Together with the ranked rewards she had, she could absolutely exchange for very strong enhancements or abilities. But when faced with all this, she felt at a loss. This sort of feeling was the same when it came to her inner heart. Her memories were fake. Everything was merely a fiction simulated by her main personality. The memories and truth had the same ending, but absolutely different characters. Should she hate him? Or was there still enmity between them? She didn't know. As she saw the final battle slowly approaching, this feeling got stronger and stronger. She was completely at a loss about what to do for the final battle, which was why she was silently standing here. My main personality, am I just a stand-in you created? Was it to avoid those memories, or as Xian said, to hide in secret and gain power? Is that why you created me? Yin Kong shut her eyes as she muttered. She didn't know whether her main personality could actually hear her. However, that heavy feeling in her heart kept pressuring her, making her unable to avoid asking this. Forget it. I know you won't reply. I suppose you wouldn't be so bored as to chat with a toy you created. Yin Kong laughed self-mockingly. She bitterly opened her eyes, and began to search through God for exchangeable enhancements and abilities as preparation for the final battle. Alice in Wonderland pill? What's that? Yin Kong was currently checking out enhancements and abilities. However, her mind stirred, and a hint of will not her suddenly inquired about something that wasn't one of her enhancements or abilities. It was something created through alchemy, its price for exchange a costly 4,000 points and a rank C reward. Its written effect was to allow one to enter their inner heart. This effect seemed. Yin Kong hesitated briefly before exchanging for this alchemic creation. It was a small white pill that looked like aspirin, completely different from those medicinal pills created through cultivation. It looked incredibly ordinary and didn't look to be worth its costly exchange price. Is this what you wanted, my main personality? What do you want it for? Yin Kong held the pill in her hand, talking to the empty air. Unfortunately, the air didn't have a voice to reply to her. After a long while, she finally sighed and returned to her room. Although she felt helpless, she had still decided to eat this pill. No matter what, she had to meet her main personality, even if it was just for the final battle. After returning to her room, she poured a glass of water. She looked at that pill in the palm of her hand. It looked ordinary, like normal flu medicine. Yin Kong exhaled, before placing the pill in her mouth and downing a large mouthful of water. After that, she just sat there silently, waiting for some change to occur for the main personality to appear. Gradually, her surroundings seemed to shatter apart like glass, leaving only darkness behind. In that endless darkness, it was as if Yin Kong was standing in the void of the universe. There was no up or down, the past and future not existing. There was only her, and the person standing behind her. Is that you, my main personality? Yin Kong was silent for a long while, before she could no longer resist asking. MHM. It's me. You're really at a loss. Is there anything you want to ask me? The voice behind her spoke clearly and crisply. I'm tired. The two sides lapsed into silence. After a long while, the main personality sighed, believe it or not, my goal when I first created you was really just because I wanted to die then, or at least sleep for a long time. I didn't want to face him. You should have gained those memories already, right? Those were my initial thoughts. But, even though that's your initial thinking, in the end you still used me as something to rely on to overcome your heart's devil, merely a secondary personality to absorb. Something like this, Yin Kong muttered with her head lowered. There was a girl behind her with her head similarly lowered. Her figure and appearance was exactly the same as Yin Kong, down to even the dejected expression on her face. It really was just an accident. I didn't know at the beginning that when our two personalities merge, we can break through to the mid-fourth stage. The heart's devil belongs to us both. Although this method is cunning, it's also incredibly risky. But we passed all that. I only found out all this after I woke. The original intent in creating you wasn't to absorb you. The girl behind her replied with her head bowed. But the result remains. For the final battle, for challenging the two hymns, you can't resist them if you don't absorb me. Let's not even mention strength. It's already a complete loss if we factor in the time you can fight. Do you want to lose the final battle? So, in the end, you'll still absorb me. Yin Kong said despondently. She recalled all her experiences since entering God's realm, from the first life and death battle, the first time fighting alongside companions. Also, there was getting injured, dying, revival and having positive feelings towards Zhen everything. Although she had already entered the realm for a long time, it hadn't been long compared to her time in the real world. However, the impression it had left on her had been 10 times, 100 times, deeper than her memories before. These memories were treasures she cherished as much as her life. How could it be easy to let go of these memories? Perhaps it won't be absorption. The girl behind Yin Kong suddenly said. Yin Kong's entire body started. She turned around in disbelief, and the girl behind her coincidentally turned around with a gentle smile at the same moment. The two back-to-back girls finally saw each other for the first time. So this is you, my main personality? Yin Kong extended a hand towards the girl, but was blocked by an invisible layer. It was like she was facing a mirror of herself, with her both inside and outside the mirror. This is us. You are me and I am you. We can't be separated. I know of all your memories. Every laugh, every pain, every battle fought alongside companions and every joy after every juncture between life and death. I know of all this. These memories won't disappear. The only thing that will be is a slight barrier between us. Well, become one. It won't be one person absorbing the other. We, ah no, me. These are my memories. You'll give me memories, and I'll return you memories. The girl facing Yingkong smiled gently as she placed her hand and overlapped it with Yingkong's. In an instant, the two girls went silent, gazing at the other motionlessly. Time seemed to grind to a halt. In the real world, Yingkong was silently sitting there, as if she was asleep. When she woke up, no one knew which her it was. Compared to Yingkong's confusion, the rest of the team members displayed more or less excitement. It wasn't just the large amounts of points and ranked rewards that excited them, but an excitement wrought from the coming final battle. This excitement wasn't simply one from happiness, but also one born from fear and nervousness, all combined together. This was the current mental state of most of Team China. Imhotep, we're participating in the final battle, will we survive? In Imhotep and Ang Sunamun's room, he and ancient Egypt's premier beauty were mutually embracing. They had been together in the real world for years now, and had experienced the test of true love in Independence Day. Their feelings towards one another was already engraved deep in their souls. In this aspect, they could be considered to be deeply in love. It was just that the two weren't ordinary virtuous people. In certain ways, they would be considered villains to normal people's morality. They at least weren't trustworthy and loyal people. When it came to critical junctures like the final battle, they would consider their own path of survival. Those medicines can indeed greatly extend your lifespan. But if you want to live a long life together with me, the most important thing is to raise your strength. You may have exchanged the rank B Sun's priestess. But just exchanging it won't let you exhibit the enhancement's power. You need to train it and battle with it. Imhotep looked at Ang Sunamun. When he spoke to this point, Imhotep paused. He exhaled softly, giving her a peck. We still have revival chances. I can use the Book of the Dead to revive if I die, while you can use points and rank rewards if you die to revive. So. Ang Sunamun froze. The beautiful eyes looked seriously at Imhotep. The handsome bald man had a solemn expression on his face. He said seriously, I wish to go through the final battle alongside Team China. Being together with them really makes me feel at ease. It's interesting too, so much more than that dreary life in the real world. It's really not that bad a life fighting together with them in these peculiar worlds. Ang Sunamun gave a serious look to Imhotep, before finally giving a soft smile. She pressed her lips against him, and a moment later, lifted her head. I'll follow you. If I die you have to revive me. Just like long ago, when I waited in the duet for your revival. I know you'll come. Even if you suffer innumerable suffering and pain, even if you're turned into a mummy for 1,000,000 of years, you'll surely come for me. Yes. I'll definitely come. Even if I die, even if I'm turned by others into a mummy again, even if I sleep for 1,000,000 years, I'll surely come. I will find you. I found you. Cheng Xia roared as he banged continuously on Xian's room door. His face was contorted with rage, looking positively murderous. His shirt had specks of blood on it, while his pants had 2 large gashes on it, the dried blood looking dark red and practically covering over half the pants. I've come for you. Xian, open up. I want to kill you. Cheng Xiao's face was full of anger, looking incredibly ferocious. The gauntlets you gave me. You said it would be usable once rank B wind energy stones were mounted. Damn, it was indeed strong when I mounted in 2 wind energy stones, but why was it so uncontrollable? It drew the wind towards me and nearly castrated me there and then. Open the door for me, idiot. Cheng Xiao pounded on the door again at this point. However, he hadn't expected the door to actually open with a bang. Unprepared, Cheng Xiao stumbled in, falling towards the ground. Fortunately, Cheng Xiao's agility was good and a hand pressed down, his entire body flipping over and standing up again. Come down. I'm in the basement. Xian's voice drifted over from the basement. Accompanying were several small booms of explosions. God knows what he was doing. If he was experimenting, these booms should be considered normal? Cheng Xiao's entire body gave a start. He only recovered from shock then. This was obviously Xian's room, or to be accurate the level above his experiments room. This understanding was too horrifying. It had long since been an unspoken rule of their team that if you were feeling suicidal, go to Xian's experiments room. He had actually courageously made his way over. Was this him being gutsy or just being plain insane? Just as Cheng Xiao was about to retreat, he accidentally saw the bloodstains on his leg. Driven by his anger, he advanced forth again. Before, he had happily accepted a pair of Wind God's gauntlets, a pair of gauntlets capable of rousing the winds for sudden attacks, that Xian had retrofitted for him. It could double his strength when used in conjunction with his Nanto Sucho Ken to fight his enemies. The stamina usage of Nanto Sucho Ken was reduced greatly as well. Unfortunately, the gauntlets were a low-grade martial cultivation treasure. Using the gauntlets needed cultivators' martial arts that used refined chi, which was a power he didn't have. However, after obtaining cultivation manuals and the One Ring's energy conversion ability, Xian had indeed created a low-yield energy converter instrument. It could use various energy stones to convert energy. For this low-level cultivation treasure, ordinary stones were enough. Thus, Xian had promised Cheng Xiao to retrofit a pair of gauntlets. Not discussing the modification process for now, but Cheng Xiao, after receiving the completed gauntlets, he had immediately put them on and made his way to his basement. He had wanted to test out the power of these gauntlets. The results had been satisfactory, or rather, too satisfactory. Although Nanto Suchoken's power had increased by not just fivefold, there was a regrettable imperfection. Nanto Suchoken, a technique for wind flow manipulation, hadn't been able to control the hurricanes generated by the gloves. The wind had been too strong, so the fist attacks had gone in all directions. Two half happened to streak past his thigh. If it had been off a centimeter or two, he would have become a temporary eunuch. Damn. He'll risk it all. It's nothing but a trip to the basement. I heard Hungla came here before. Didn't he end up leaving Hale and Hardy? My luck can't be that bad. Go. The feud of ending one's line can't be forgiven. Cheng Xiao cursed a few times, rousing his courage, before proceeding down to the basement. Among everyone, Xian's room had been the one enlarged the most. There were various experimental instruments Cheng Xiao couldn't name all over the place. Much scrap metal was accumulated not far off. These things were arranged so all the way until far off. There were also some strangely shaped experimental instruments as well. This place could be said to have all been done by this man on his lonesome. You're here? Xian was focusing all his attention as he lowered his head and looked through a microscope. There was a tiny lump of meat squirming slightly under that microscope. It was sealed behind a glass window. As Xian looked at the chunk of meat, he continuously manipulated the laser inside to bombard the meat for several minutes. He only finally lifted his head to look at Cheng Xiao when the lump of meat was charred into charcoal. Is anything the matter? Xian pushed up his spectacles. Cheng Xiao had originally come here in a very overbearing manner. However, when Xian received him in such a civil manner, his momentum was drained some. Still, he shouted loudly, "What the heck were those gauntlets you made for me? That wind simply wasn't controlled by me. The power is a little strong, but I don't want there to be nothing left but two piles of meat chunks of my enemy and I after I use this gauntlet. Damn, isn't the same logic as for a suicide bomber. What power is it that you want?" Xian was silent for a moment before asking. Cheng Xiao paused, scratching his head. It's best to have a badass and swap power. Like, the kind where you wave your hand and a million meteors will descend and crush my enemies to death. Then, a pile of beauties will squeal at me. Is there some problem? Xian ignored Cheng Xiao's foolish actions. He turned around and pressed something on the control panel. Regretfully, no such power exists in this world. To be accurate, power is just a relative term of address. Another term is sacrifice. You need to gain something to lose something. When you gain power, you need to lose what you used to grasp this power, such as its manipulation or control, or something slowly lost before, like time, life. The thing you're talking about isn't power, but a fantasy. Xian replied without his head even raising. Cheng Xiao looked as if he knew his words were too much of a joke, so he continued to scratch his head. Fine. I admit my words before were a joke. Then, help me alter these gloves. They just need to not hurt me. Did you not comprehend my words? Xian gave a cold sidelong glance to Cheng Xiao. You need to lose something to gain something. For you, who is far from reaching the level of martial cultivation, you need to lose safety in order to use these gloves. You need to injure yourself at the same time as when you harm others. Just look at Zheng. All of his power was gained, so he had to lose a lot to gain a lot. If you're not willing to lose what is needed to manipulate these gloves, you don't deserve such great power. These gloves don't suit you. Toss them. Cheng Xiao froze for a while, before giving a bitter laugh. Although I know you're right, there wasn't a need to be so blunt about it, right? I know, grasping this power requires me to go and wholeheartedly train. I shouldn't be thinking of using it perfectly as soon as I get them, because that's the domain of power fantasies and not reality, right? Although that's correct, it makes people want to beat you up when it comes from your mouth. I finally understand why Zheng always thinks of beating you up. Frankly, so do I right now. As he spoke, he saw Xian manipulate the green platform to inject something into that lump of meat. That lump of meat seemed to become a living thing. It broke apart, and completely filled the glass. Not only that, but the lump of meat sprouted multiple tentacles and eyes. In its center, it even grew a hideous-looking mouth with countless teeth. He didn't know what this monstrosity was, which was terrifying to such an extent. This is a variant mixture using the T-virus as the base with Zheng's genes. It's a mutated product that can allow any cell to produce extensive mutations within a short time. The end result will be a terrifying organism of the initial fourth stage. Computer. Insert energy from the anti-particle annihilation. Keep only 10% of the mutated organism within the glass. Xian explained for a few sentences to Cheng Xiao, before giving instructions to the computer. A second or two later, there was a flash in the glass window. It was as if there was a miniature sun inside the glass window. Although it was only for a short time, Cheng Xiao still shut his eyes in pain. When he opened his eyes, the organism inside hadn't seemed to decrease, but instead increased. It was practically about to squeeze and break out of the glass. It seems the energy from anti-particle annihilation wasn't enough. Fine. Computer. Begin the dual particle annihilation reaction. Insert enough energy after 10 seconds. Leave 5% of the organism. Xian turned over to Cheng Xiao. He said indifferently. Don't panic. There's only a possibility of explosions. Xian. Screw you. The final battle approached. It wasn't only Ying Kong who had the thought of becoming stronger and resolving the confusion in her inner heart, but everyone. After all, no one knew what the final battle's conclusion would be. Facing Team Devil and Team Celestial and the rest of God's Realms teams, made this battle far more dangerous than any before. Everyone had a chance of death. Thus, it was important to settle any sorts of wishes before that. Zero crawled noiselessly on the ground, looking at the distant shooting target. With a light squeeze of the Gauss sniper rifle, the distant target splintered into pieces, accompanied by a loud bang that spread through the entire basement. The Gauss sniper rifle's strength was boundless. It was a weapon originally developed to attack satellites in outer space. Its strength was hence naturally great. It used electromagnetism as its driving force, using it to propel bullets out by accelerating it to the limit through electromagnetism. Its kinetic energy would reach terrifying levels. As an example, even Zheng in destruction while in his dragon transformation wouldn't be able to dodge this bullet once fired. Of course, blocking it wouldn't be an issue. The power is enough. But in comparison, the range though Zero contemplated in silence. Using the line of sight of his eyes to deduce, he had an over 90% chance of scoring a hit within 3 kilometers. Every kilometer increase would lead to an accuracy drop of 10 to 20%. This was until the limit of his eyesight, the horizon, and the limit of his range using the naked eye. Of course, things were different with the Psyche Force user around. His personal range limit was the horizon, but he could use Psyche Force scan to determine the range for what his eyes couldn't see. Although in this case, his accuracy was roughly 70 to 80%. It was enough for long-distance battles. However, what if he wanted to further increase his range? Against a long-distance sniper with a similar shooting ability, weapon, and Psyche Force user as him, his life and death was 50-50 if their levels weren't too different and factoring in the environment and surrounding situation. From this, it could be seen he didn't have too much of an advantage. When this Gauss sniper rifle hit, they died. Even after the Mystic Eyes enhancement was used, they also just died, just in a different manner. So, he didn't actually have much of an advantage against sniper specialists. I need to become stronger. I can only survive the final battle then. Zero rose from his crawling state. He was lost in thought for a while before finally carrying the gun and walking up the stairs. Up the stairs, there was a young girl there playing computer games. Although the girl had had a male appearance when Zero had first created her, with a handsome appearance, she was a girl after all. She had grown her hair out, and looked like an adorable loli. She was pure and lovable, and was pretty and charming, a true beauty. When the little girl saw Zero walk up from the basement, she smiled sweetly as she jumped into Zero's embrace. She called out Big Brother intimately, attaching herself to him like a koala. Zero dotingly hugged her as well, kissing her small face as he said, "Little lass, go and play your games first. Big Brother has some matters to handle." The girl pouted. However, she was still sensible. She returned Zero's kiss and jumped out of his embrace before sulkily playing games in front of the computer. Zero sighed. He felt slightly vexed. AMD walked up to the little girl and patted her head. "Little lass, wait a week for Big Brother. When I come back, we'll go for a good vacation. The seaside, forests, plains, deserts, snowy mountains, you name it, we'll go wherever you want." The girl immediately turned around happily, making a happy sound of assent. When Zero walked out of the room, that happy smile was still imprinted in his mind. Live on. I have to live on. Zero shouted internally. He then proceeded to go to Xian's room. Although he didn't want to admit it, Xian did indeed surpass mortals when it came to suggestions on how to increase power. When entering Xian's room, Zero didn't go about it as pettily as Cheng Xiao did. He knocked softly on the door. Zero only walked in when the door automatically opened. After a few steps, he made the turn to the basement and proceeded down unhesitatingly. There was actually someone else in the basement. Tenji was staring at Xian's hands with a look of terror. He didn't even turn around when Zero came down. It was only when Xian put what was in his hands into the glass window did Tenji then sit down limply on the chair, his entire body trembling. "Did I miss something?" Zero asked curiously. It seemed the fright Tenji had received wasn't light. He kept shaking his head. "It's your good luck if you missed something." Zero didn't probe more. If the matter pertained to Xian, he understood why missing it may be a blessing if he missed it. In summary, your heart had better been strong enough if you were going to interact with this man. "Is anything the matter?" Xian lifted his head and asked this question when he saw Zero. "Yes. It's regarding the Gauss sniper rifle modification that I asked you a few times about before. You said it need large amounts of points and rank rewards to purchase the materials before it could be modified. Now that we have the points and rank rewards, can you help me modify it? What kind of power would it have after modification?" Zero asked, thinking about it. Xian finally put down what was in his hands. He walked to before Zero and Tenji, saying, "I originally wanted to call the two of you over. Since you're already here, I can now discuss with you two the new way of cooperative battling." "A new way of cooperative battling?" Zero and Tenji asked curiously together. A new sniping method. Xian walked to a large pile of blueprints accumulated. He searched within for a long time, before finally finding a blueprint within. This is the new Gauss firearm based on the super railgun from God. Its power isn't much stronger than the Gauss sniper rifle, but it has a different method of sniping. Zero looked curiously at the blueprint. He was a sniper and didn't have much knowledge of the sciences. Thus, he could only continue to listen to Xian's explanation. Tenji was even more curious. Although he had strengthened his newest enhancement and had gained an incredible calculative and linguistic ability within a short period of time, and he would have great skill in decoding information, he was still utterly ignorant in sniping. How could he create a new method of battle with Zero? This left the two baffled. Xian pushed up his spectacles. This only exists in God's realm. Or perhaps, only God's realm team members can form this sniping method. This sniping method can't exist in the real world. It's sniping in a parabolic arc. Xian retrieved a globe from close by. He pointed at a certain spot on it. If you're here, then with the Psyche Force user's assistance, your furthest sniping range should be here and here. It's basically a really short distance. The main issue is that you can't shoot an opponent over the horizon, right? The reasoning behind the super railgun and Gauss weapons is the same. They use electromagnetism as the driving force to accelerate the bullet to the limit and generate an extreme kinetic energy to strike the target. But the first large difference it has from Gauss weapons is that the super railgun uses Earth's magnetic field to provide the acceleration in order to achieve the kinetic energy. Secondly, it doesn't need to be aimed. It just needs to hit anywhere within a large area around the target like a meteor. This shows some of its essentials. The basic reasoning is like this to construct a new weapon, the Super Gauss Railgun Sniper Rifle. Xian pointed to a spot on the globe and said, the bullets fired by this new weapon has a large magnetic field. It'll experience influence from the Earth's magnetic field that will make it curve, which will at the same time cause its range to increase greatly. This is because the Earth's magnetic field won't just not decrease its kinetic energy, but will instead increase its kinetic energy the further it's traveled. Let's not discuss for now how when it shoots out of the atmosphere, the kinetic energy will decrease due to the distance from the magnetic field and its weakening. Your issue now is that you can't shoot a target over the horizon, right? If your bullet can curve due to the magnetic field, your range will go from here to here. It'll be 10 times before. Zero's interest was roused internally, but he couldn't help but ask, still, I simply don't know how to grasp these magnetism rules. You yourself said that there'll be a curved trajectory due to the Earth's magnetic field, which is completely different from straight line sniping. I simply can't calculate the trajectory at that instant. That's why, that's your mission, Chi Tenji. Xian clapped his hands together. Zero will be in charge of targeting and hitting the enemy. Leave the data for the influence and interaction between the Earth's magnetic field and the bullet to Tenji to calculate. Use the Psyche Force user to help you two share information during this period. Then, we will be able to achieve aiming from an incredible distance when facing an enemy. Calculate. Shoot. Then loop these actions repeatedly. But Tenji froze for a while, before hurriedly saying. Xian shook his head. I know what you're thinking. Those extreme calculations will be very taxing on the brain. You can only maintain this state for a short time, right? No problem. Cooperate with Zero's weapon. You two's cooperation will bring about extraordinary efficacy. It might even reverse the battlefield at critical moments. This is the new way of cooperative battling I was speaking of. Zero never knew that sniping could be done like this, with a range of 30 kilometers. This was already a new method of sniping that transcended the concept of sniping. Its strength was also so great. If he was unprepared, even someone of Zheng's level might be seriously injured. Of course, it was only a possibility. If someone like Zheng or his clone activated their light of the soul, seriously injuring them would be a pipe dream with their level of power. What if we add in the mystic eyes? Zero asked this question, and the answer went without saying. In the final battle, even if it was him, he would be able to pose a threat to clone Zheng, and it wasn't a negligible one. It was like how in The Lord of the Rings, he had killed Luo Yinglong in one strike. Although clone Zheng was surely much stronger, if Zero managed to take him by surprise in an evenly matched battle. But, will Zheng let us participate in his fight? Zero wasn't a blabbermouth like Zheng Xiao. As someone who had been battling together with Zheng since practically the start, he knew Zheng better than most. And it was because he knew more that he knew one single fact. Zheng and his clone were fated enemies. It was the kind of fate where it couldn't be settled through the hands of others. It was the most important battle Zheng had to face, a battle for him and him alone. The final battle. Can we still battle together? Or is it like before all the way till death? Zero silently thought this. He proceeded to walk back to his room. The materials to modify his firearm had already been purchased. The remaining work would all be left to Xian. Next, was the final battle. Speaking of Zero, Kampa couldn't not be mentioned. Assassins and mercenaries seemed like similar professions. In truth, the two lived in the same world. It was just that one killed in cold blood, while the other would hot-bloodedly kill directly and openly. Kampa, who had been sleeping since Nightmare on Elm Street, had finally awoken. Although he only felt as if he had gone to sleep, with at most a very lifelike nightmare, it had still left an indelible shadow on his heart. I saw my war comrades in the nightmare. It really was a lifelike nightmare. It's as if I really did see them. Kampa was looking at the busy blonde beauty before him, and said slightly absent-mindedly. When Kampa was asleep, This woman had been the one most worried for him. She had been the one attentively taking care of him whenever he had been staying in God's dimension. Although Kappa had had her personality set as sexy and straightforward when he created her, he had also inputted the information of deeply loving him. So, no matter how straightforward or irresponsible she was, she would give her all for him sincerely as long as she loved him deeply. Ever since Kappa had returned, this woman had been all smiles. She had even personally cooked for him, which all displayed how deep her love for him was. It was just that Kappa had too many things weighing on his heart, so he didn't notice all these details. The blonde beauty was currently cutting vegetables, and immediately frowned. Stop thinking about that nightmare. If it's a nightmare, everything inside must be fake. Does the life in reality not match up to a nightmare in deserving your attention? Kappa froze. He laughed, before pulling the woman over for a hard kiss, until her breathing became hurried. Correct. That nightmare was an illusion. Only reality is true. Ha ha ha. Kappa had also recovered that unrestrained smile of him. After eating a meal with that blonde beauty, he made a trip to his basement alone. He sat there and quietly reminisced about his past war comrades. These memories had been etched deep into his soul. As a person who had put almost his whole life into the mercenary world, his life had been one of war comrades, war comrades. So, he couldn't forget them even if he told himself it was a nightmare. Forget it? I won't forget it if it's so hard to. I just need to win the final battle. That was Kappa's inner thoughts. However, he didn't expect that this was the greatest flaw in the deepest recesses of his heart. Regardless, Kappa had still accumulated a lot of points although he had always been asleep. As for rank rewards, he just had to ask the rest of the team. For Team China after their harvest, they could take out some rank rewards no matter what. Kappa exchanged the high-level werewolf bloodline and Xian had used the super railgun system to construct a gauze railgun cannon for him. Of course, this wasn't a cannon in the broadest sense of the word. It just sprayed gauze bullets out over a large area. It could thus be called a machine gun instead, or even a machine cannon. It was a huge weapon weighing over 3,600 kilograms. Only someone of Kappa's stature would be able to use this agilely. Its strength wasn't inferior to Zero's gauze sniper rifle, only that its range and accuracy were far inferior. The other person who had woken up, Lan, had widely different feelings from Kappa. She had felt only refreshed since her awakening, as if all the burdens in her heart had been thrown away. Although the shadow of her previous boyfriend remained in her heart, only the feelings of nostalgia and first love remained. She would no longer be fettered by this obsession. Although she hadn't overcome the heart's devil, the flaw in her psyche was no longer so obvious, or had even begun to gradually begin to vanish. Lan didn't even know this herself. When Zheng had called her when in her heart, she had actually wanted to respond to him. Even if she was in the middle layer of the consciousness, she had actually wanted to respond. It was just that she hadn't had any control in that situation then. She could no longer control her consciousness, which was why she had asked him that when she awoke. She hadn't been wanting to go to his side, but a genuine gratitude and fondness. Lan wore a long dress, humming a song as she cooked. Since the return to God's dimension 5 days back, she hadn't showed the slightest bit of fluster and anxiousness. She spent each day reading, watching movies, cooking delicious food. Her afternoons were either spent brewing a pot of red tea and playing computers games, or an afternoon nap. It was like she was in the real world, and was one of those ordinary slightly well-off girls from Shanghai, relaxed and free, without a single worry for the next day. As for her points and rank rewards, Lan didn't waste them. If other team members or rookies needed something, she would do her best to help them exchange for it. She had also exchanged some Psyche Force enhancements and abilities. It was a highly consuming active ability for Psyche Force, which could forcibly break open the opponent's Psyche Force screening for a short period of time. Although it was only for a few seconds, these few seconds were enough to change it greatly whether for battle or scheming. Apart from this, Lan hadn't done anything else. She hadn't gone to talk to Zheng or ask Xian about the final battle. She only happily enjoyed her every day, as if she wasn't in God's realm. I'll bury my love for him deep in the heart. I'll put him together with that man from the past. These are all my cherished memories. No one knows what will happen in the future. Perhaps I'll meet someone better, or meet another like him. Love needs fate after all. I definitely won't break his and her happiness. Let's handle it like this. I can also be happy alone. Such a girl, who was so beautiful and easygoing. Lan was indeed too relaxed. She could perhaps have been the one most relaxed in Team China. As compared to her, the remaining members were all training individually. They would all rather have had their time extended several folds. This went especially so for those with a great sense of responsibility. After all, everyone was an important combatant who could possibly reverse the battlefield in the coming battle. Wangxia was the sort of person. He was perhaps the most selfless person in God's realm, while the most selfish at the same time. It was hard for him to not be different from the rest since he had entered God's realm through hypnosis. He had abandoned safety and the peaceful real world for his country to enter this terrifying and dangerous realm. He may no longer have had even the chance to return, and may also have had a miserable death. After all, there were many horror movie worlds. Apart from natural disaster movies like The Perfect Storm, there were ghosts, aliens, viruses, and so on. Entering this realm with foreknowledge of this required tremendous courage. Wangxia was such a man who lacked resentment and regrets. As a soldier, He had his glory and responsibilities, so he trained like crazy. This was all in order for the victory in the final battle and for the possibility of returning to the real world. He had to become stronger for all this. For some unknown reason, he gradually noticed some changes in his bomb dominator ability as his personal strength rose and he kept using it. The demon energy it provided him was becoming thicker and the number of bombs that could be controlled, as well as their power, had been increased. Even the bombs he personally created had increased in variety. Of course, if controlling a miniature atomic bomb would use 10 units of demon energy, creating a bomb with the power of a hand grenade would use 10 to 20 units of demon energy. Creating bombs with particularly great amounts of power would take much more demon energy. Thus, it was more cost-effective to control bombs in comparison, especially when the team had Xian who provided bombs in a steady stream. This change was good after all, so Wang Xia had hoped to have more time to train this ability. He had thus been the first to enter a movie world amongst the team, even earlier than Zheng. He had also requested many plasma bombs from Xian before entering, taking away practically all the plasma bombs Xian had stored. Since they already had miniature nukes in reserve, these plasma bombs that had high power but a not too large area of effect were no longer too useful. It was better used for training. Apart from this, he had exchanged over 10,000 ordinary bombs and filled up several dimensional bags before entering the movie world. The movie he had chosen to enter was Starship Troopers, an incredibly terrifying movie. A sea of bugs filled the mountains there. Even if the current Team China went to the bugs planet, they may not have been able to retreat easily. This is your antidote. Although I'm not sure if there are venomous types of bugs, and if this antidote can suppress those venoms. I used a modified T-virus to test it out, and this antidote can resolve viruses at the genetic level. A large majority of viruses should be killable. Take it. Xian handed over a dimensional bag to Wang Xia. A number of team members were around, gathered at God's platform to wait for Wang Xia to enter the movie world. Wang Xia didn't hesitate, receiving the bag and asked, "Thanks. If this antidote can remove viruses on the genetic level, it shouldn't cause any problems for the human body, right? If the second stage is unlocked, I think nothing should happen." Xian said indifferently. "If so, why did you look away?" No matter what, Wang Xia was still going to enter Starship Troopers. Before he exchanged the entry, he suddenly turned to Xian. "Xian, I've always wanted to ask you about what you said that time. You said our country's government isn't suited for the whole world, or America's current position, right?" Xian nodded definitively. "Yes, correct. Absolute power equals absolute corruption, no matter which person or government grasps this power. As long as there's only one in this position, it would result in corruption, when only one body of governance makes the laws, as well as oversees and enforces it. What do you feel?" Wang Xia lowered his head quietly. He suddenly lifted and said solemnly, "What I love is my country. No matter what, I'll go on loving it. It has nothing to do with political party or worshipping anyone, or all the problems of the army. I just want to tell you, I'll love my country forever." "Oh. Okay. My father was like that too." Xian didn't have any other response, speaking as indifferently as always. "I'm going." Wang Xia then exchanged the amount of entry time to Starship Troopers. He didn't leave much points after. He had no abilities that needed to be exchanged, so he exchanged a lot of time for Starship Troopers, practically exhausting all his points. In an instant, before anyone could recover from surprise, Wang Xia appeared before them again, dressed in a major's uniform from Starship Troopers that was tattered all over. Wang Xia looked incredibly tragic, his body full of fresh blood and wounds. The soot from explosions also blackened his face. However, his spirits seemed high, completely not being dispirited in the least by his injuries. "Good, good. It's been a long time, everyone. Everyone's been well lately, I trust?" Wang Xia laughed. How convenient. Everyone nearby had this thought. Some found it absurd, and some didn't know how to describe it. However, this method of going to movie worlds to train looked not bad. "How do you feel?" Zero asked Wang Xia curiously. "Feel?" Wang Xia paused for a moment, before laughing. "That's not much to feel. Over there, I battled non-stop after entering the army. Every day, I struggled for survival. Sometimes, I would relaxedly recuperate in the mothership. There were also pretty girls who would strike up a conversation with me. I quickly rose to the major rank since my military merits were notable. It doesn't look good for the human army over there. They're being bullied by the bugs and are losing planet after planet. As for the bomb dominator, take a guess, what do you think my latest self-created ability is?" Every around shook their heads. However, upon seeing how large Wang Xia's improvement was, several people played with the idea of going to a movie world to train. Honestly, calling it self-created isn't correct. This ability still needs large amounts of bombs for me to control first. I grasped nuclear fusion. Wang Xia said slightly mysteriously. He took out a small container after speaking. "This is an isotope of hydrogen. If I control several miniature atomic bombs to explode at the same point, the resultant heat is enough to reach the requirement of nuclear fusion. It's stronger than a normal miniature atomic bomb by over 10 times, practically reaching the level of a tactical nuclear missile. This is an ability I obtained after much testing." Wang Xia chuckled to the rest. If so, this meant Wang Xia's strength had rose a lot. And, he had supposedly unlocked the third stage as well. In certain cases, life and death battles were indeed better than anywhere else to train people, whether in strength or others. Speaking of which, a large reason of why I could unlock to the third stage was thanks to Xian's antidote. Using it gave me unbearable pain. I just wanted to die, and didn't in the end. My genetic constraint thus rose a lot. Xian, don't go off. Regardless, Wang Xia's success seemed to foreshadow something. The second to enter the movie worlds was someone no one expected, Hung. Hung had been behind closed doors ever since returning from God's realm. It was only during the second day after Wang Xia returned did he leave his room and go to God's platform. He then did something strange. He abandoned his silver bow, instead exchanging for the serious bow he had first used when he entered the movie worlds. This was an ancient bow that couldn't compare to the silver bow. Of course, this referred to the ability to use scattered shots. If this wasn't taken into account, the two bows weren't much different if Hung's explosive shot was used to evaluate. When his exchange was complete, he went over to knock on Yanwei's door. In truth, Yanwei had been secretly paying attention to Hung from the start. Although she thought she had been very careful, this small action had been noticed by all of Team China. She just wasn't aware of it. When Hung had opened his door to exchange the serious bow, she had already seen everything from the gap in her door. She had completely closed the door when Hung walked over to her room. She ignored Hung's knocks, only powerlessly leaning her back against the door as she sat down in a daze. Hung knocked for a while, before finally going quiet. After a long while, he said, I'm going to Starship Troopers too. I'm not Wang Xia, and I'm not familiar with the army nor do I have leadership skills. I don't know how to become a major, close combat or have the large area of effect damage that Wang Xia has. I only want to become strong, so I need to go and train myself. I'm possibly going to die there, never to return. I originally wanted to see you one last time. Wei, I'm not going to talk about the next life. This life, I may be unable to repay you. But, I hope you won't use my mistake to hurt yourself. If I die, live on properly. Hung exhaled, turning towards God. Just as he crossed a few meters, the door behind abruptly opened. Yanwei was standing there laughing coldly. She was holding a glossy dark green bow in her hand. It wasn't known when she had exchanged this bow. However, the bow looked very harmonious in her hands, without the slightest feeling of incongruity. You want to escape your punishment through death? I won't let you die so easily. Even if you have to die, I have to watch you do so. I'll go with you to Starship Troopers and watch you torn to pieces by bugs. Yanwei said coldly to Hung. All right. If you're at my side when I die, I won't be afraid even if I go to hell. Hung froze, before smiling to Yanwei as he said. Without turning back, he walked to the center of God's platform. Yanwei hesitated, before laughing coldly as she followed behind him. As usual, Xian gave Hung and Yanwei each a bag of antidotes. According to him, this was the improved antidote, with a medical efficacy definitely several times better than before. You think he'll believe you? These were Hung's words. Still, he placed the antidotes in his hand, and extended a hand towards Yanwei. Yanwei had a huge reaction, freezing up before shouting, What do you think you're doing? Holding your hand. The time to enter the movie world is just an instant to God's dimension. If we don't go in together, we'll likely miss each other and go in individually. So, I'm holding your hand. Hung looked straight at her, and she hesitated a long while before passing her hand to Hung. Their souls seemed to tremble in the instant their hands held. Then, they entered Starship Troopers. Hung and Yanwei returned in the same instant. The two held their hands as they returned. As soon as they appeared, Yanwei immediately threw his hand off. However, she didn't say a word, not acting scathingly towards Hung as usual. She merely turned back to her room. It seemed as though there had been a large progression in the relationship between the two. Well, how was it? Cheng Xiao immediately chuckled as he went to Hung's side, with an expression that was just asking to be beaten up. Hung smiled bitterly. Not too much of an improvement. There was improvement in my genetic constraint. It should reach the threshold of the fourth stage soon. That antidote really was effective, just that the process was too painful. In other areas, I didn't manage to self-create anything. We were fighting for our lives every day, and sometimes I didn't even have time to draw my bow and had to rely on guns to shoot the bugs. Overall, my improvement was quite large. 7 arrows is my maximum for explosive shot now. It has a tremendous power, enough to level a small mountain peak if I use a +3 enchanted arrow. I shot this arrow out at that time in my agitation when that universe-faring queen bug took to the skies. It indeed pierced a hole straight through it, but I had to spend 3 days submerged in the healing fluids. It really was dangerous then. The price of this arrow is too much, although its strength is great. Still, I want to see how powerful the pinnacle is, the 9-arrow explosive shot for shooting down the sun. Cheng Xiao patted Hung hard. Don't talk about those boring things with me. I just want to ask you, did you do it? Do what? Damn it. Of course it's that. Sex. Don't play innocent with me. Tell me quickly, did you do it? Cheng Xiao shouted at Hung like a wolf. Yanwei, who had already walked far off, suddenly turned around and threw out her green bow. It knocked Cheng Xiao down, and she ran back to her room without even turning around, shutting her door with a bang. Cheng Xiao rubbed his head, immediately saying when he saw Hung helplessly pick up the green bow, you must have had some illicit romantic relationship. Haha, she used to hit you, and now she hit me instead. It's so obvious that you two did the dirty. Hung smiled bitterly, shaking his head. Don't say it so bluntly. We didn't. We just had some life and death experiences in Starship Troopers, so our relationship thawed somewhat. Please exercise some restraint and don't mess up my matters more. Fine. Let's talk about serious matters. Did you two go at it on the Bugs planet? Did you actually think I'll answer that? Hung laughed bitterly as he pinched the green bow, recalling the situation in Starship Troopers. Yanwei and him had both entered the army, before going to planets at war with the Bugs. Despite lacking leadership skills, he had still successfully become a warrant officer due to their physical constitutions and prowess, while Yanwei was his adjutant. The two had experienced countless battles. It was as Wang Xia said. The battles in Starship Troopers were endless, with the humans in a position of absolute inferiority. Apart from developing a few new weapons and a small quantity of piloted robots, humanity's power simply didn't match up to the Bugs. The Bugs there were an intelligent life form which had evolved over a period of times hundreds of times longer than humans. Although they didn't possess technology, their evolutionary pathway was completely focused on their bodies. Various types of bugs emerged in an endless stream. It had the warrior bug that excelled in close combat, the bombardier bug suited for long distance, and even several ginormous types in the universe. This wasn't even mentioning the brain bugs that were smarter than humans. Bugs were greater than humanity. In such circumstances, every battle was an all-out effort to survive. To battle for a tomorrow, the Human Federation had even set the age limit on soldier recruitment as 14. Even then, human soldiers were still much fewer than bugs. Still, humans had their advantages. After encountering loss after loss, the power of technology slowly shone. Large quantities of weapons were researched and produced, with this increase in strength taking place much faster than the bugs' evolution. Now, the Human Federation could only bet that before humanity was exterminated, the power of technological weapons would prevail over the bugs. This was humanity's sole hope. Hung and her had entered at this time. Due to their exceptional showing, they had been deployed to the planets at the front lines. That place could only be described as a meat grinder, with ordinary soldiers surviving a month on average. The monthly mortality rate had been over 10,000, and that was only when it came to ordinary battles. If a large campaign occurred, the number of human casualties would be much heavier. Hung and Yanwei had tortuously struggled for survival in these circumstances. Hung had been the one to risk his life to save her at several critical junctures, with the most frightening instance when she had actually been dragged by bugs into a hole. Hung seemingly went insane as he incited his elven bloodline's energy. Armed with only an army bayonet, he rushed in madly and slaughtered hundreds of bugs. He was practically on the verge of death when Yanwei carried him out. They were going back and forth across the boundary of life and death until the army rescued them. After being saved, Hung's squad had been redeployed to the mothership for rest. Hung's subordinates had held a party for their squad leader. Soldiers resting on the mothership were permitted to drink alcohol, so many people had gotten drunk, including Yanwei. In the end, Hung had helped her back to her room. Hung still remembered that scene. Although there wasn't the axe that Cheng Xiao talked about, they had taken an important step to the estrangement between them vanishing. The drunk Yanwei had sobbed and was muttering something incoherent. After crying herself to exhaustion, she had fallen asleep in Hung's arms. In Hung's heart, he was clear that perhaps she hadn't been truly drunk. Since that night, their relationship had relaxed, and she was capable of speaking with him normally on regular days. She could also be nearer to him during battle. Although this were just some insignificant minor matters, his spirit had still been slowly invigorated. He could finally feel her heart slowly opening up. What a pity that the time ended and we had to return. Hung sighed. He muttered, the final battle is next. As long it ends, even if it's a decade or century, I'll try my best to live. Seeking death or using death to atone is the most cowardly way out. No matter what I have to live on. I have to survive the final battle. This vow and resolution was what was most commonly found in the hearts of Team China. Perhaps, the determination to live that Zheng had shown from the start was what had slowly inspired the rest of his team. Everyone had their own past, future, and regrets. Only living would let you change it all. Dying was an idiotic action. At least in Team China, a person who wanted to die didn't exist. Lin Junchen had the most direct experience of this. As someone who had received a good education and was once a successful person who mingled in the upper echelons of society, he had a high IQ and EQ. It was hard for him to avoid becoming haughty in the real world. This was one of the reasons he entered. When someone overly arrogant met failure, they often had trouble handling the impact of this failure. Lin Junchen, who hadn't suicide there and then, had sensed the wish to live on from the companions around him after entering God's dimension. Whether for his own unfulfilled dreams, or to go back to the real world and act arrogantly there, or to simply live on, any kind of feeling would be magnified countless times in this God's realm under the pressure of dying anytime. And now he wanted to live on. As a rookie, he hadn't unlocked a deep stage of the genetic constraint or self-created an ability, nor did he even have an enhancement from God. Although he had managed to exchange the rank A marble phantasm with everyone's subsidies, this ability wasn't as strong as he thought it would be. First, you would need to imagine the thing in your mind, focusing all your mental energy on it to a high degree. Every detail of the object would have to be imagined. The entire creation process would fall apart if there was the slightest mistake in imagining it. So, Even creating a small knife for him would take over 10 minutes, with a success rate of only 40%. Why would a rank A enhancement be this weak? Junshin, who remained perplexed despite much thought on it, finally seeked Xian out to clarify. Although he was a rookie, he had still seen some of the behind-the-scenes matters of the team in any case. For example, this man named Chu Xian was terrifying, and was seemingly invincible. Marble Phantasm. This is a causality-type weapon, or one of its incarnations. Based on the deductions of the team's causality-type weapons, their power is great, but with equally great restrictions, far more than any other enhancements. This time, Xian wasn't doing experiments. He was eating an apple as he looked at a journal. Junshin's luck was good. He had come to look for Xian during the safest period. His luck was at least better than Honglu and Chengxiao based on this. Junshin paled, murmuring, "What you're saying is that I lack the qualifications to use this ability." Xian shook his head. "Let's not talk about qualifications or anything. Although there's a certain correlation between causality-type weapons and your genetic constraint, there's a bigger relation to you as an individual. Unlocking the genetic constraint can indeed help you use causality-type weapons more smoothly. Take Zero's Mystic Eyes of Death Perception for example. It hits the points of death to invert causality. If he uses it when he's unlocked the 4th stage, he'll likely hit the point 100% of the time. But if he uses it now, the success of activation will sharply drop as the range increases. This is the effect of the genetic constraint. At the same time, your Marble Phantasm is incredibly terrifying in power, as expected of a rank A enhancement. If used properly, its power can reach from rank A to rank SS. There's no strongest weapon, only strongest person. The crux is still who's using it. Junshin frowned. Just say it straight to me about how I use this ability. I can tell you to how use it. However, I don't have a way to help you use it that way. Can I tell you how to imagine? Xian smiled coldly. I'll analyze the Marble Phantasm for you. First, we need to confirm, this is a causality-type weapon. There's no objection to this, right? Junshin nodded, then listened to Xian. Since we've ascertained it's a causality-type weapon, it must be an existence that warps causality. In other words, we can't use reality's concept of causality to use it. Do you know what its strongest possibility is? Although I don't dare be too sure myself, based on this ability's description and the special properties of causality-type weapons, there are two most powerful possibilities. The first is to create a powerful object like a black hole. Understand? Since your imagination creates, you may likely be able to create the ultimate violent forces in the universe when your imagination is limitless, though you may die after. However, this might will be peerless. Junshin's face was full of cold sweat. He didn't know whether he should be laughing or crying. This Xian was indeed as the rest of the team said he was. He really didn't know how they managed to interact with him. This is one of the possibilities. The second is to create a living thing. If your imagination is sufficient, creating living things to battle for you is doable. Xian followed up. However, this second possibility didn't sound too strong. Living things. Junshin frowned. After think for a long while, he said, even if I construct a Tyrannosaurus Rex or our giant dragon, it may not be able to hold out against a single of Zero's Mystic Eye shots, right? This ultimate power is a little. Seems a little too little, right? That's because your imagination is lacking. What if you create a Zheng with his complete strength? What do you think will happen if you create such a living thing? Xian laughed coldly. The reason you would think this ability is weak is because you don't know how to use it flexibly. This ability ranks highly among causality-type weapons as a very powerful ability. This ability can be wielded to a great degree of power. It's just dependent on how much imagination you can display. Is that so? Imagination. Junshin stood up. After thanking Xian he began to leave the room. Just as he took a few steps, Xian behind him spoke up again. However much you obtain is however much you have to pay. This world doesn't have an invincible power that comes for no reason. Your ability will get stronger the stronger your imagination gets. The ability to focus your mental energy is also important. I only have one thing to tell you to pay attention to. This kind of causality-type weapon and my power of faith has a similarity. If my guess is right, the more powerful the object you create is, the more life force you throw away. This means you'll age faster. If your bota's strength and quality hasn't been increased, but your imagination and mental energy focusing is sufficient to construct a large object, I advise you not to try it. Otherwise, you'll surely die. So, you'll surely die. Junshin was quietly sitting down in his own basement, his mind constantly recollecting what Xian had told him. He didn't want to die, he absolutely didn't want to. At least in Team China, he no longer had the will to. Living on, returning to the real world, continuing to battle on living on was fundamentally his sole desire now. The ability's increase in power is based on imagination and focusing my mental energy to build the object. The weaker the object is, the lower the imagination and mental energy focused required is. It's proportional like this, right? Junshin sat there, silently in thought. After a long while, he sighed helplessly. He had entered this realm for too short a time after all. He had neither experienced much time, nor had he had the chance to unlock a higher genetic constraint. Even the time after exchanging this ability was too short. As for the final battle, his awkward position of lacking combat ability wasn't what he wanted, but it was practically unsalvageable. Can I survive the final battle? Can I survive the final battle? A rookie similarly, with the same question towards himself. This matter existed for Lu Yu too. In the final battle, there would be no distinction for rookies. All teams would go all out then. Even if Lu Yu was a rookie, and a small child, he would still need participate, and might be the main combat force in certain areas. Lu Yu had already enhanced his Psyche force and relied on the other members to exchange the obelisk card. He could summon it for 3 minutes based on his current Psyche force, and he would need to rest for over half an hour after to recover his Psyche force. He could only summon it this way. Although it was only 3 minutes, this obelisk still surpassed his original expectations. As expected of one of the 3 Egyptian god cards. Its full name was Obelisk the Tormentor. A robot made of metal, with a height reaching 20 meters, was summoned. It looked fearlessly tall and mighty. Obelisk also had a special ability, which was that it could absorb defensive barriers. This was perhaps related to the materials that it was constructed from. It could absorb attackers' defensive barriers, which would allow it to hit its target in the next moment. It could be considered a special characteristic that allowed it to ignore defense. From this, it could be seen that this card and the obelisk from the real world's Yu-Gi-Oh had similar characteristics. Both allowed for direct attacks on the opponent, completely ignoring defenses. It was just that Lu Yu had run into a problem. This obelisk wasn't like other summon cards that completely listened to its master. When he had first exchanged it, he had happily returned to his room to test it out. In his basement, he had indeed managed to summon out a colossal monster. Obelisk had been almost scraping the ceiling and had covered Lu Yu's entire field of vision. This little boy was at the age of liking fantasies and robots. Although he had completely consumed his Psyche force after summoning, he still cheered weakly. He even ran towards the robot. However, the robot had instead sent a foot over to step on him. It had stepped down just a few meters from him. With another step, Lu Yu would have turned into a meat paste. The boy had immediately fainted in fright. When the Psyche force he contributed vanished, Obelisk had vanished as well. When boy woke up, he had seen a deep footprint embedded on the ground. It had to be admitted that Obelisk's power was phenomenal. Whatever it was used for, it would be suitable even to block bullets. However, as Xian said, something had to be lost to be gained. There was no power in the world that had no cost. Lu Yu was facing such a situation. As one of the 3 Egyptian god cards, Obelisk's power needed no doubting. At the same time, apart from the vast amount of energy spent summoning it, it required a constant focus of mental energy concentrated to control it after it was summoned. It would go berserk otherwise. Such a weapon was simply a double-edged sword. Lu Yu had no choice but to search how to control Obelisk step by step. He would run far away desperately every time he summoned it. However, the robot would go insane and rampage at its original position every time he started running. Even the ground made from metal couldn't withstand its attacks. Although Lu Yu was safe, Obelisk would madly attack, not listening to his commands. After the ground had been completely plowed, it vanished again once the time ran out. After this persisted 2 more times, Lu Yu had no alternative but to look for Xian. If it's a summon monster that needs controlling, how could you focus if you run and hide? Of course, getting you to stand there and take it isn't realistic either. Find Zheng and get him to help you subdue Obelisk, while you try controlling it from the side. Practicing a few times should help you get proficient. Xian answered thus. Zheng was currently sitting down quietly in his basement. Strangely, he hadn't gone through any sort of high-intensity training in the few days since returning to God's realm. He just sat there silently every day, not a word spoken. It was as if he was in a daze thinking about something. He only stretched lazily as if he had just woken up when Lu Yu came to look for him. He followed along the boy to his room. Understood. You want me to ensure your safety while you're controlling it? No problem. Just stand there and control it well. It'll keep you safe no matter what. Zheng smiled faintly as he nodded. He stood in front of Lu Yu and watched him summon Obelisk. The little boy's heart was slightly panicked. It wasn't to say he didn't have faith in Zheng, or that his strength was insufficient. It was an instinctive terror. It was like if someone capable of destroying planets told you he would block a comet for you, you would still tremble all over in fear as the comet sped towards you. This was the same logic, a terror born from the inside. Lu Yu gave a cough to mask his fright, and took out the obelisk card before beginning to gather his concentration. When the colossal robot appeared, it indeed attempted to ferociously step on the 2. The giant metal foot descended from the skies, and Lu Yu cried out in fear. Still, Zheng was responsible. He stepped down, leaping into the air. Without visibly taking any stance, he simply kicked at the robot's foot. With a boom, the robot was kicked backwards, retreating several steps, before finally stabilizing itself after retreating several steps. Zheng landed on the ground, preparing to receive the robot's next attack. Lu Yu was watching, engrossed. Zheng hurriedly shouted out, before Lu Yu finally began to concentrate on controlling the robot. The difference this time was that his heart was much calmer. He was also much more focused than before. Obelisk slowly came to a stop, no longer attacking. All right? Slowly bent over, yes. Then raise your fist just like that. Haha, Zheng, the control is successful. I'm finally in control of this robot. Lu Yu laughed excitedly. That's right. You've succeeded. Zheng smiled as he patted the boy's head. Remember this feeling of control, where your mental energy is highly focused. Don't fear its attacks. It's your weapon you've summoned, so there is absolutely nothing to fear. Yes. Lu Yu nodded. Zheng laughed. He stealthily walked towards the basement's exit. For some unknown reason, he felt slightly flustered upon seeing this robot. He suddenly recalled a former member of Team China, who also controlled robots, with great latent potential. Just in terms of that, he wouldn't lose out to Zheng. It was a latent potential purely for living on. Ah, Gondo. If you hadn't died, you'll have exchanged the strong series among robots, and Eva, by now, right? Your latent potential was so great, you'll surely have caught up to me quickly. If so, we could have fought together, then faced the final battle together. What a pity. Zheng sighed dejectedly. Pushing open Lu Yu's door, he walked out. The joyous laughter of Lu Yu and the tremendous noise from that giant robot walking about sounded out from behind him. Every person in Team China was attempting to become stronger, and were slowly doing so. It was perhaps due to preparation being the key to success. After accumulating so much for so long and silently gaining strength, they finally had a qualitative change before the final battle. Team China's strength was worthy of being hailed as among the top 3 in God's realm. They were much stronger than imagined. Yes. Our Team China is stronger than we imagined. Honglu muttered to himself. As Team China's strategist, Honglu's intelligence far exceeded ordinary people, although he was the inferior strategist. Not even Xian would deny this. Thus, in all matters, he needed sufficient understanding when it came to the team's situation before the final battle. Actually, Honglu was exhausted. Although he was a strategist too, he was still much inferior to Xian. This was something he couldn't deny. So, he had to think about much more things, which made him even more tired, such as the comprehensive evaluation of Team China's strength. He didn't know which tier exactly Zheng's power fell into. If our format for the final battle is King vs King and soldiers against soldiers, he'll exclude Zheng from the team's evaluation. No matter how strong he is, before he handles his clone or his clone kills him, he won't have a way to help us. In other words, the final battle is a battle where we lack Zheng. Honglu pinched his hair as he made corrections on the paper. However, after writing some things, he would crush the paper and trash it in dissatisfaction. Then, he would start writing on paper again. It can't be calculated, so I should take him as an influencing factor. If we defeat Team Devil and Team Celestial first, the remaining team members will help Zheng gain the victory for the final battle, then challenge his clone together. If he defeats his clone first, it'll be him helping us. But considering the gap between his clone and him, no matter how it's evaluated, his influence is negative. Isn't our burden even greater? Honglu grabbed his head in vexation, then shouted out as he crushed the paper and threw it in the trash again. When he extended a hand to grab another sheet of paper, a white hand grabbed his arm. Xiao, time to eat. It was a pretty woman, that was of the big sister type. It was the big sister who had taken care of him when he was being researched on in the Neurological Institute. When he entered God's realm, he had created her anew. Although he hadn't had any profane thoughts at the beginning, there had still been the subconscious thought of it'll be nice if she loved me when he created her. As expected, this big sister really loved him. Unknowingly, something had sprouted between the two. Honglu rubbed his head in distress. All right. I'm coming. Just as he finished speaking, the pretty woman hugged him. He didn't resist, just silently leaning against her chest. Recently, there's been so many matters. It's also related to the final battle, so I keep forgetting the time to eat. You can eat first, you know. I'll come over when I'm done. Silly fool, the woman smiled. Eating without you there only fills up the stomach. What's the point? Are you still worried for the final battle? Yes. No matter how I calculate for the final battle, our team is just too lacking compared to Team Devil. Ignoring everything else, I have no idea how to scheme even just for their ability or item to observe the other teams. So Honglu murmured worriedly. The woman cut him off, smiling. How about Xian? What are his thoughts? That no-nonsense man? Even if he has a decision he wouldn't tell us. So, for the final battle. The woman cut him off again. There aren't so many SOS. Let nature take its course. Haven't you already fulfilled your responsibilities? You're more hardworking than most of Team China. Even if the final battle is lost, you have nothing to be guilty about. While that's so, if I do lose and die, we won't be able to be revived anymore. You'll die too. Honglu sighed. But I won't be lonely in the least. If I do die, won't you be at my side? Yes. My responsibilities have been fulfilled. If I do die, you'll be dying by your side. Honglu's eyes shone, as if some resolve had appeared in his heart regarding the final battle. Every person of Team China were working hard to become stronger and making preparations for the final battle. As their preparations finished, the time for the final battle slowly approached. A day and night were left from that day now. Then, I'm going to Lord of the Rings. I'll rest a day after returning. Then, everyone will prepare to enter the final battle. Zheng smiled as he said this to everyone. Today was the day he entered Lord of the Rings for training. The whole team, minus Yingkong who no one knew the whereabouts of, were all gathered and looking at him. They were watching him grow stronger, until he could rival his clone. But why Lord of the Rings? Isn't Starship Troopers' atmosphere of mortal danger better? Hung asked uncomprehendingly. That's because what I need isn't battle. Zheng didn't turn his head back. He looked at God, his back facing everyone as he said, I need insight. The peaceful and vast Lord of the Rings is actually more suitable. Then, I'm going. Don't worry, I won't let you all down. I won't lose again to my clone in the final battle. This time. This time he'll definitely win. God, exchange entry 2.